The shadows stretched long over the gravel road as Emily walked alone, her small frame swallowed by the golden hush of autumn. Her heart thudded fast, too fast, like wings fluttering in a cage. The bus had broken down miles back. No signal, no help, just silence. And now, the low growl of tires. A dark sedan crept behind her, its engine humming like a threat. The voice that called from the window reeked of alcohol and something darker. "Need a ride, little girl?" It slurred. Emily clutched her backpack, backing away. "My grandmother is expecting me," she whispered. The door swung open. A rough hand grabbed her wrist. She screamed, the sound raw and high, cutting through the forest like a flare. They dragged her into the car and veered off the road down a narrow logging trail, swallowed by trees. In a clearing, they tossed her to her knees. The taller man rifled through her bag. The other just stared the way snakes stare, before striking. Emily's voice trembled. "Please, let me go." Then came a snap, a twig, another. From the forest's edge, something moved, silver fur, amber eyes, catching the dying light. A growl rose from the dark, low and resonant. It wasn't a dog's bark. It was older, deeper, primeval. Emily didn't scream this time. Her eyes widened instead, because she knew before she saw it fully, that it wasn't just any animal. It was him. Before the men could speak, the figure stepped into the clearing. At first glance, it looked like a wolf, larger than any Emily had ever seen in real life. Silver gray fur, bristling eyes, glowing like fire, trapped in glass. But something in its posture, its stillness, made it more than animal. It stood between her and the men, like a shield, unmoving, untamed. "What the hell?" the taller man hissed. The wolf growled low and deep, stepping forward deliberately. It didn't lunge. It didn't bare its teeth wildly. It simply was rooted, like the forest itself. The air around them thickened. Leaves trembled. Then the moment split. Panic drove the men back, one stumbling into the other, cursing, and bolted for the car. Gravel spun as tires screamed down the logging trail. Emily remained frozen on the ground, hands trembling, heart loud in her ears. The wolf turned to her slowly, his eyes bright and amber, locked with hers. And in that moment, she remembered. She remembered the first time she'd seen him. That spring, she'd left behind her small Portland apartment and arrived in Pine Creek like she always did when school ended. Her mother worked impossible hours at the hospital, worn and distant since Dad passed. But at Grandma Martha's cottage, tucked deep in the woods where phone signals vanished, Emily found peace. Martha was legend in the village. The herb lady, some whispered. Forest Martha, others called her with wary respect. Her eyes were sharp, her garden wild, and her cat Thunder, larger than most dogs, and just as territorial. When the old truck pulled up to the gas station, that May Emily had thrown herself into her grandmother's arms, drinking in the scent of lavender and firewood. "I missed you, Grandma," she'd said into her cardigan. "I missed you too, sweet bee," Martha replied. Back at the cottage, Emily spotted the odd little enclosure near the shed. "What's that?" she'd asked. Martha's eyes twinkled, but her voice grew serious. "Come see." Quietly. Inside the wooden pen lay a creature curled on worn blankets. Not a puppy. Not quite. His fur shimmered gray like starlight. His ears already pointed, his gaze ancient. "A wolf," Emily whispered, breath-catching. And when his amber eyes met hers, something ancient stirred. Something that would change both their lives forever. "They named him Shadow," Martha said. Thunder, the enormous silver tomcat, had brought him home from the eastern ravine, half-starved and orphaned. Tracks in the mud told the rest his mother had been shot. likely by hunters like Frank Dawson, men who mistook violence for strength. He was weeks from weaning when Thunder dragged him into the cottage yard, and since that moment, something strange had taken root. The cat, normally aloof, had become a surrogate parent, grooming the pup with long, deliberate licks, sharing food, sleeping curled around him. And now with Emily there, the bond deepened into something harder to define. Emily spent every moment of summer with Shadow. Martha fashioned a harness so they could walk the woods together, always, with Thunder trailing like a silent sentinel. The pup, impossibly intelligent, responded to his name within days. He watched Thunder with reverence, mimicking every crouch, every pounce. "He's not just smart," Martha said one morning, eyes narrowed with admiration. "He learns like he remembers something, as if it's all returning to him." Emily nodded, brushing burrs from Shadow's coat. Sometimes it felt like that to her too, that he was not being taught, but reminded. Yet beneath the joy, unease flickered. In town, whispers began. Wolves weren't welcome here, even young ones. Frank Dawson showed up first, sunburnt rifle slung suspicion heavy on his brow. "You're raising a predator, Martha," he said, eyes darting toward the pen. "They kill for sport." "That's not a pet. It's a killer waiting to happen." Martha's jaw set. "He's an orphan, not a threat, and he's contained." Emily, heart racing, stepped forward. Shadow would never hurt anyone. Frank turned to her cold-eyed. "That's what every fool says, right before the teeth sink in." That night, Emily lay awake, Shadow curled at her side despite his assigned bed by the hearth. Thunder purred at her feet. Her fingers tangled in Shadow's soft fur, grounding herself in the sound of his breathing. Was she wrong to love something wild? Martha's voice drifted back from memory, soft and firm. "There are exceptions to every rule, sweet bee. Some wild things choose us, and we choose them right back." Outside in the woods, the wind stirred the trees like breath. Summer moved slowly in Pine Creek every day, a quiet unfolding. As the heat deepened, so did Shadow's presence. He grew swiftly, gangly legs, massive paws, a coat that shimmered like wet stone. But even as his body changed, his gentleness, with Emily, remained constant. They trained in the meadows and forest edges, Martha guiding Emily in old rhythms passed down from generations of Callaway women. Shadow learned more than sit and stay. He learned silence, patience, instinct. Emily's voice was soft, but he listened as though it were sacred. Thunder, ever watchful, became his unlikely tutor. The old cat moved through the forest like mist, and Shadow followed low to the ground, no wasted steps. "Watch how he moves," Martha would say, pointing. "The forest hears everything, but it speaks only to those who don't shout at it." Emily listened, and over time, so did Shadow. But the village didn't. Murmurs grew sharper. The general store fell quiet when Emily entered. Farmers eyed her with suspicion. Sheriff Miller paid a visit, citing concerns. Martha welcomed him calmly, showing the reinforced enclosure and letting Shadow demonstrate his training. The wolf pup sat retrieved a glove by name and backed away from the sheriff without growling. "He's smarter than most dogs," the sheriff admitted. "But you know what the town thinks." Martha only nodded. That night Sarah arrived. Emily's mother, tense and tired from hospital shifts, stepped out of her car and froze at the sight of Shadow. "Get away from him," she said, voice sharp with fear. Emily protested, pleading. Martha intervened, tried to explain, but it spiraled quickly into argument. Voices rose. Shadow fled under the porch. Thunder followed. Then came the silence, the kind that holds decisions too heavy to carry. Sarah's ultimatum was clear. Either Shadow went, or Emily would return to Portland. But Martha, calm as ever, sat them at the kitchen table and revealed a truth, long hidden, a legacy. Her mother and grandmother had shared bonds with the forest. Not magic, but knowing, listening. When Sarah was a child, lost in a storm, something with golden eyes had led her home. Emily stared wide-eyed. Sarah said nothing, but something shifted in her face. In the end, they compromised. Emily could stay until summer's end. Shadow would never enter the village. And when the time came, he'd be placed with a sanctuary. If he was still willing to leave. By midsummer, the forest shimmered green and gold. Shadow now stood nearly waist-high beside Emily, lean and powerful, his puppy clumsiness replaced by a quiet, watchful grace. Still, his heart remained tethered to her, never far, never rough. Martha's routines had become gospel. Each day began with lessons in both wilderness and wisdom, how to move unseen, how to read tracks, how to hear the forest breathing. Shadow, now fluent in Emily's voice and gestures, was more than a pet. He was family, but trouble simmered. Frank Dawson's accusations grew louder. He claimed livestock had been attacked, claimed Shadow's scent was on the wind, claimed fear. And then one afternoon, Emily overheard Frank in the woods. He wasn't alone. Another man, Bill Morgan the sheep farmer, walked beside him. "County meetings Monday." Bill muttered. "Sheriff says it has to be legal." Frank spat into the creek. "By the time the vote comes, that wolf'll be big enough to tear someone apart." Emily pulled Shadow back into the ferns, heart hammering. That night she told Martha. The old woman stirred her stew in silence, then set the spoon down, with a calm that felt colder than anger. "Frank's always needed something to aim at," she said. "His daddy was the same." But the Callaways, she tapped her chest. "We don't scare easy." Sunday came. Martha tied her silver hair back and drove them to town. Shadow and Thunder were left behind with extra food and water. The town hall, a humble room in the church basement, was already crowded. Frank was there, arms crossed. Photos of torn sheep carcasses lay in a pile beside him. "They kill for sport," he insisted. "You can't train instincts out of a predator." Martha stood straight, her voice unwavering. "Shadow is 4 months old. He's never left my land. He's never harmed anything but mice. And he's never been alone, because he has us." Then Emily rose. Her voice trembled but didn't falter. "He's like me," she said, eyes scanning the crowd. "Alone after losing his family. Learning how to belong again. My dad died. I stopped talking, but Shadow listens. He chose me." The room went still. Sheriff Miller nodded solemnly. Time for a vote. The vote was close, but when the hands were counted, Shadow was allowed to stay until the end of summer. Weekly checks by Sheriff Miller. No roaming. And by fall, he'd be sent to a licensed sanctuary. No exceptions. As they drove home, Emily sat quiet in the truck's passenger seat, watching the trees blur by. "Are you really going to send him away?" she asked softly. Martha's hands tightened on the wheel. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, sweet bee." The days that followed were golden, yet tinged with urgency. Emily trained Shadow harder than ever, teaching him new commands, refining his responses. Martha supported her, but worry lined her face. Shadow, perhaps sensing the countdown, clung close. He slept beside Emily each night, his head resting on her feet, his eyes following her like twin embers. Then one moonlit night, Emily woke to Thunder, pawing urgently at her cheek. The bed was half empty. Shadow was gone. She followed the old cat into the yard, heart-pounding boots barely laced. And there, at the forest's edge, Shadow stood perfectly still. His ears twitched. His body quivered. A distant howl echoed across the trees, long, low, mournful. Another answered it. Shadow's head lifted. His muzzle opened. And for the first time, Emily heard him answer. The sound tore through the night, like an ancient chord being struck. High and unfinished, it wavered in the air. and Emily, shivering beside him, knew what it meant. A pack. His pack. She placed a hand on his back. "Are you going to leave?" she whispered. "Is that what you want?" Shadow didn't move. Instead, he pressed his weight against her side and let out a low, sorrowful whine. Thunder joined them, curling against Emily's other side. The three remained there until dawn painted the sky in soft golds and pinks. When Martha found them, she said nothing, just looked at Shadow, then at Emily, and nodded. "A wild thing may hear the call," she murmured, brushing a leaf from Emily's hair. "But it doesn't have to answer it right away." The days grew shorter, and with them came the shadows. September loomed, and Emily felt it in everything. The coolness of the air, the way leaves crisped at the edges, the way Shadow watched her a little longer at night. Her return to Portland was set. A final visit, just a weekend, was promised before school resumed, but it didn't feel final to her. It felt like a storm building. Trouble found her on the road. The bus had broken down 7 miles from Pine Creek. A kindly couple offered Emily a ride into town, but by the time she arrived, Martha was gone. "I can walk," she insisted. "I've done it before." She hadn't. Not alone. Not at dusk. The forest swallowed her flashlight's glow. With each step, the road grew narrower, the trees closer. Her backpack thumped softly against her spine. Then headlights. Relief flooded her. Then curdled. The car wasn't Martha's truck. It was dark, sleek, predatory. It pulled up beside her. "Well, look who it is," sneered Frank Dawson, rolling down his window. "Martha's little wolf girl." Emily stopped walking. Her heart punched against her ribs. "I'm just going home," she said, trying to sound steady. Frank's grin held no warmth. "Funny. I just saw your grandma driving the other way." Looked like she was in a hurry. Another man sat beside him, younger, broader. His brother, maybe. The resemblance was sickening. "Get in," Frank said. "We'll take you to her." "No, thank you," Emily replied quickly, every lesson on stranger danger roaring to the front of her mind. Frank's voice hardened. Wasn't really asking. He opened his door. Emily ran. She plunged off the road into the woods, branches clawing at her arms, breath coming in sharp bursts. Behind her, feet thundered. Voices cursed. She didn't look back, but the forest was too dark. Her foot caught on a root. She hit the ground hard. Her flashlight flung into the dark. Pain shot through her knees. She scrambled up, disoriented, heart galloping, and a growl sliced through the night. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't a dog. It was Shadow. Shadow's snarl rippled through the darkness, low, resonant, full-throated. Frank staggered to a stop. "Easy there," he muttered, jerking his rifle around, but the wolf was already between him and Emily. Hackle's high amber eyes blazing. The younger Dawson brother cursed, fumbling for a flashlight. Its beam wavered, catching the silver fur, the bristling tail, the white flash of teeth. Shadow didn't lunge. He advanced one deliberate step, then another, forcing the men backward, with the sheer certainty of his presence. "Shoot it," the brother hissed. Frank's finger twitched on the trigger, then froze. The wolf's gaze pinned him, ancient and unblinking, as if weighing every sin he'd ever committed. Sweat gleamed on Frank's brow. "Don't," Emily whispered. She rose slowly from the ground leaves clinging to her jeans. "He's only protecting me. Let us go." "Shut up," Frank barked, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. The forest held its breath. Wind rattled dry leaves overhead, 1,000 brittle warnings. From the shadows, another sound emerged, a deep chest-rattling growl that was not Shadow's. Then, a second. Eyes, pairs of them, ignited in the underbrush like scattered embers. The wild pack. Silent, watchful, summoned by Shadow's cry. Frank's courage shattered. Back to the car. Now. They retreated in stumbling haste gun barrels swaying. Shadow held the line until the sedan's doors slammed and the engine roared away, gravel spraying in panic. Only when taillights vanished did the pack step forward, rangy silhouettes, moonlit fur, curious noses, lifted toward Emily. Shadow turned to her ears, flattening a soft whine, rising in his throat as if asking permission. "It's okay." She breathed tears streaking dirt down her cheeks. She laid a trembling hand atop his head. The tension melted from his muscles. The pack eased, forming a loose circle that felt less like a threat and more like an honor guard. Emily's knees wobbled, exhaustion crashing over her. Shadow pressed against her side to steady her, warm and alive. In that moment she understood. Sanctuary wasn't a place, it was a choice, made over and over, to stand between danger and the ones you love. "Take me home," she whispered. Shadow tipped his head to the night sky, released one long, rising howl, a signal answered by distant echoes, and then guided Emily through the trees toward Martha's porch light, the wild pack melting silently behind them, like spirits satisfied. By the time they reached the cottage, Martha was already there, waiting on the porch, lantern in hand, her face pale but steady. Without a word, she wrapped Emily in her arms and held her until the girl's shivering stopped. Shadow stood beside them, silent and still like a sentinel carved from moonlight. Thunder emerged from beneath the porch and wound between their legs, tail twitching with relief. Inside, the warmth of the cottage felt unreal. Emily sat wrapped in blankets, sipping tea she barely tasted. Martha listened as she spoke, haltingly at first, then with more strength, describing the ambush, the escape, the wolves. When she finished, the old woman sat back, exhaled, and looked toward the fireplace. "I always knew he wasn't just ours," she murmured. "But tonight, he chose." The next morning brought clarity and decisions. Sheriff Miller arrived early, summoned by Martha before dawn. Frank's claims had already reached the council. There'd be consequences. But when Emily described the attack, her voice unwavering, the sheriff listened carefully. When she told him about the wolves, he didn't scoff. He just looked tired. "Frank's done," he said quietly. "He crossed a line, and he'll answer for it. But that wolf, he can't stay here, Emily. Not anymore. Not with this much heat." Emily didn't cry. She just nodded. Martha spent the day making calls. Sanctuaries, rescues, wild reintroduction programs. Most said no. A few said maybe. One out in Montana said yes, but only if the animal was human socialized and still young enough to adapt. By evening, the plan was made. Shadow would leave in 2 weeks. Emily would stay until then. They would make every minute count. The next days were soft and bittersweet. Emily woke each morning with Shadow curled at her feet and spent her hours exploring their familiar trails, teaching him new words, gestures, tricks. At night, they lay on the porch swing with Martha and Thunder, sharing stories, watching fireflies blink across the meadow. And sometimes in the distance, the pack howled. Shadow would lift his head and listen, but he didn't go. Not yet. The last morning came quiet and golden. September sunlight filtered through lace curtains, touching Emily's cheek as she opened her eyes. Shadow was already awake, sitting beside her bed watching. As always, she dressed slowly. The small weekend bag sat by the door, packed, not with sadness, but with thought. A red ball for Shadow, a weathered copy of her favorite book for Martha, a single feather she'd found on their last walk together. Martha brewed tea in silence. Thunder watched from the windowsill. The world outside was beginning its shift, leaves turning amber, birds gathering. Everything knew. Change was near. When the bus pulled up to the dusty depot, Emily hugged her grandmother tightly. "You'll take care of him," she whispered. As long as he chooses to stay, Martha replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. And even if he doesn't, he'll never be alone. Shadow padded forward. Emily knelt and wrapped her arms around him. His fur smelled of pine and smoke. She buried her face there for one breath. 2. I'll come back, she whispered. You won't forget me, right? Shadow licked her cheek once, slow, deliberate, then pulled back and looked her in the eye. Amber to brown. A promise. The ride back to Portland felt longer than it was. Her apartment felt smaller than it had. City noise, once background hum, now scraped against her ears like static. Even school felt wrong, too loud, too fast. Each night she called Martha. Each night she asked the same thing. Is he okay? And always Martha said yes. He was eating well. He was listening. He still watched the trees at night. Then came the news. A placement had opened. A sanctuary near Yellowstone. A place with space and professionals, where he could choose between wilderness and comfort. But Emily's heart twisted. She had imagined something gentler, something slower. The final weekend visit was approved. Sarah, softened by time, said yes, without argument. You need to say goodbye, she said. Emily nodded. But in her heart she hoped it wouldn't be goodbye. Not really. Because sometimes when the moon was high and the city quieted, she thought she could hear it soft and distant, the echo of a howl. And she imagined he was listening too. The return to Pine Creek felt like a dream Emily had been holding her breath to wake into. As the bus neared the forest's edge, every tree felt familiar, every bend in the road, like a memory waiting to happen. Martha was waiting at the depot this time, arms open, truck idling. Thunder was perched in the back seat like a chauffeur with opinions. But Shadow wasn't there. He's waiting at home, Martha said softly. He's been watching the driveway all morning. The reunion was quiet. Shadow didn't leap or bark. He simply walked out from the trees, ears low, tail swaying, and pressed his head into Emily's chest. She sank to her knees, hugging him close, no words needed. For 2 days they were inseparable. Emily didn't cry. She laughed, played, ran. She taught Shadow one last trick, a spin a bow, and he performed it like a prince, proud and dignified. But time doesn't wait. On the final morning, Emily woke early. She slipped outside before breakfast, barefoot, in the dewy grass. Shadow followed. Thunder watched from the porch. They reached the edge of the woods together. I don't want to say goodbye, she said, voice tight. But I also don't want to cage you. Shadow tilted his head. His ears flicked. Then slowly he stepped forward, into the trees only a few feet, then stopped. He looked back. Emily smiled through tears. Okay, she whispered. We'll do this your way. When they returned to the cottage, Martha had news. The sanctuary called, she said. They've reviewed the footage, the records, the sheriff's logs, and they're willing to do something rare, release him slowly. Let him stay here through fall. They'll send someone to visit. Observe. No cages, unless he chooses. Emily's breath caught. So he can stay, Martha nodded. For now. If he keeps choosing us. Outside, Shadow lay in the sun. Thunder curled beside him. A wolf and a cat. A child between them. Not wild, not tamed, just together. Autumn lingered longer than expected that year. September faded into October, and still the forest held its color, as if the land itself was delaying the goodbye. Emily returned to school in Portland, but her heart remained tethered to Pine Creek. The apartment was as noisy and gray as ever, but she moved through it differently now, steadier, braver. The loneliness wasn't gone, but it no longer devoured her. Each night she called Martha. Each night she asked about Shadow and Thunder, and each night the answer was the same. They were well. They were waiting. On weekends, Sarah drove her out. Not every time, but often enough. And with each visit she noticed something change, not just in Shadow, who grew stronger and more graceful, but in her mother too. One crisp Saturday morning, Sarah stood in the yard watching Shadow retrieve a pine cone Emily had thrown. His movement was fluid, his return deliberate. He dropped the cone at Emily's feet and sat expectant. Sarah smiled, a real one. "He's amazing," she said. "I still don't understand it, but I see it now." Emily beamed. The sanctuary representative arrived mid-October. She wore sturdy boots and asked gentle questions. She observed Shadow for hours, how he responded to commands, how he interacted with Thunder, how he rested his head in Emily's lap, as if there were no safer place in the world. At sunset, she closed her notebook and turned to Martha. "Let him stay," she said simply, "under observation, with freedom. If he chooses to leave one day, we'll trust he knows how. No formal signatures, no transfer cages, just trust." That night, Emily sat on the porch, book in hand, Shadow pressed against her side. Thunder sat above them on the railing watching the moon. Somewhere far off, a howl echoed through the forest. Shadow's ears twitched. He listened, then lowered his head onto Emily's lap and sighed. She stroked his fur gently and whispered, "You're home." And this time, she knew he had chosen to be. Not because he was tamed, but because love, when freely given, was the wildest thing of all.